Mia Larkin was born into a world of privilege and expectation. As the only child of real estate mogul David Larkin and his wife Susan, Mia's childhood was a carefully curated display of elite private schools, equestrian lessons, and debutante balls. From an early age, she was taught the importance of maintaining a flawless public image, a lesson that would shape her entire life. Despite the outward appearance of a charmed existence, Mia's home life was far from idyllic. David's demanding nature and Susan's constant scrutiny left little room for genuine emotional connection. Mia found solace in her academic pursuits, excelling in her studies and developing a particular passion for art history. Her intelligence and drive earned her a place at an Ivy League university, where she thrived academically, struggled socially. The pressure to maintain her family's reputation while forging her own identity led to a series of tumultuous relationships and a growing sense of disconnect from her true self. Beneath her polished exterior, Mia grappled with deep-seated insecurities and a constant need for validation. Her relationships with men were often intense but short-lived, as she found herself drawn to those who could provide the excitement and attention she craved, rather than the stability she claimed to want. It was during this time that Mia met Evan Brooks, a quiet, confident environmental scientist. She was attracted to his grounded nature and saw in him the potential for the kind of life she had always been told she should want. As their relationship progressed, Mia convinced herself that Evan was the answer to all her inner turmoil, key to becoming the person she was meant to be. But as the wedding day approached, Mia began to have doubts. The facade she had so carefully constructed was beginning to crack, revealing the complex and conflicted woman beneath. Evan Brooks grew up in stark contrast to Mia's world of privilege. The son of a small-town doctor and a high school English teacher, Evan was raised in a close-knit community where hard work, honesty, and loyalty were prized above material success. From a young age, he displayed a natural aptitude for science and a deep curiosity about the world around him. His parents nurtured this interest, encouraging him to explore and question everything. Summer vacations were spent camping and visiting science museums, fostering Evan's passion for environmental conservation. Despite his academic prowess, Evan remained grounded and well-liked by his peers. He was the type of person who would tutor struggling classmates or volunteer at the local animal shelter without seeking recognition. This genuine kindness and integrity became hallmarks of his character throughout his life. Evan's dedication to his studies earned him a scholarship to a prestigious university, where he pursued a degree in environmental science. It was during his college years that Evan formed a close bond with his cousin Blake Hudson, who came from the wealthier side of the family. Despite their different backgrounds, the two cousins became inseparable, with Evan often serving as a stabilizing influence on Blake's more impulsive nature. After graduation, Evan's passion for conservation led him to join a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting endangered species. His work took him to remote corners of the world, where he witnessed both the beauty of nature and the devastating impact of human activity on fragile ecosystems. These experiences only strengthened his resolve to make a difference. It was at a fundraising event for his organization that Evan first met Mia Larkin. He was immediately struck by her beauty and intelligence, but it was her hidden vulnerability that truly captured his heart. Evan saw in Mia someone who needed the kind of love and stability he knew he could provide. As their relationship deepened, Evan believed he had found his perfect partner, someone who shared his values and could challenge him intellectually. He envisioned a future filled with shared adventures and a common purpose. The proposal came naturally. Evan threw himself into planning a life together with the woman he loved. Little did he know, the foundation of trust he so valued was about to be shaken to its core, testing his beliefs and the very essence of who he was. Blake Hudson was the black sheep of the family, a role he seemed to relish rather than resent. Born into the wealthy branch of the Hudson clan, Blake grew up with all the advantages money could buy, but none of the emotional stability he truly needed. His father, a high-powered corporate lawyer, was rarely present, and his mother sought solace in social events and prescription medication. Left to his own devices, Blake developed a rebellious streak early on, using his charm and good looks to manipulate those around him and get away with increasingly risky behavior. Despite his troubled home life, Blake possessed a keen intelligence and a natural charisma that drew people to him. He excelled in school when he applied himself, but more often than not, he could be found leading his peers into mischief. It was during one of these misadventures that he first bonded with his cousin Evan, who had come to visit during a summer break. Evan's steady presence and genuine concern for Blake's well-being made a deep impression. For perhaps the first time, Blake felt truly seen and valued for who he was, not just for his family name or his ability to entertain. This connection with Evan became a lifeline for Blake, one of the few stable relationships in his otherwise turbulent life. As they grew older, Blake's path diverged sharply from Evan's. While Evan pursued his passion for environmental science, Blake drifted between college majors, never quite finding his purpose. He eventually settled into a job at a startup tech company, more for the lifestyle it afforded than any real interest in the work. Blake's personal life was equally chaotic. A string of failed relationships left him cynical about love, yet he continued to seek validation through conquest. He developed a reputation as a charming rogue, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. When Evan introduced Blake to Mia, something shifted in Blake's world. Here was a woman who seemed to match him in wit and complexity, who understood the pressures of coming from a prominent family. What started as harmless flirtation soon developed into a dangerous attraction, one that Blake knew he should resist, found himself powerless against. As the wedding day approached, Blake found himself torn between his loyalty to Evan and his growing feelings for Mia. The internal conflict brought out the worst in him, leading to increasingly erratic behavior and a sense of desperation that would ultimately contribute to the tragic events to come. The engagement of Evan Brooks and Mia Larkin was the social event of the season. Evan had proposed on a moonlit beach during a conservation trip to Costa Rica, presenting Mia with an ethically sourced diamond ring that symbolized both his love and his values. Mia, swept up in the romance of the moment and the promise of a stable future, said yes without hesitation. News of their engagement spread quickly through their social circles. The Larkins were thrilled that their daughter had finally chosen a suitable partner, even if they found Evan's dedication to nonprofit work somewhat quaint. The Brooks family welcomed Mia with open arms, charmed by her sophistication and apparent devotion to Evan. As the couple began to plan their wedding, the first cracks in their relationship started to appear. Influenced by her mother and years of societal expectations, Mia pushed for a lavish affair that would be the talk of the town. Evan, true to his modest upbringing and environmental conscience, argued for a smaller, more intimate celebration. Their compromises often felt one-sided, with Evan reluctantly agreeing to a larger guest list and a more extravagant venue than he was comfortable with. He justified these concessions as acts of love, wanting Mia to have the day of her dreams. Mia, in turn, felt a growing sense of resentment, interpreting Evan's reluctance as a lack of enthusiasm for their union. As the wedding date drew nearer, the stress of planning took its toll on the couple. Mia became increasingly short-tempered, snapping at Evan over small details like the shade of the table linens or the selection of wines. Evan, in an attempt to keep the peace, retreated into his work, spending long hours at the office and leaving much of the decision-making to Mia. It was during this tumultuous time that Blake began to play a larger role in their lives. Always ready with a joke to lighten the mood or a shoulder to cry on, he became a confidant for both Evan and Mia. Evan, grateful for his cousin's support, failed to notice the lingering glances between Blake and Mia or the way their hands would brush against each other for just a moment too long. Mia found herself looking forward to Blake's visits, relishing the excitement and unpredictability he brought into her increasingly regimented life. She told herself that her growing attraction to Blake was simply a result of pre-wedding jitters, a natural response to the stress of planning such a momentous event. As the day of the wedding approached, the tension between Evan and Mia reached a fever pitch. A heated argument over the seating arrangements left Mia in tears and Evan storming out of their apartment. It was Blake who came to comfort Mia, bringing with him a bottle of expensive champagne and a sympathetic ear. That night, as Mia poured out her fears and doubts, something shifted between her and Blake. The line between comfort and desire blurred, and in a moment of weakness, they shared a kiss that would set in motion a chain of events leading to tragedy. The next morning, racked with guilt but unable to deny the passion she felt, Mia made a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. She convinced herself that what Evan didn't know wouldn't hurt him, and that she could have one last taste of excitement before settling into married life. Little did she know that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down around her. The affair between Mia Larkin and Blake Hudson began like a spark in dry tinder. quickly consuming all reason and caution. What started as stolen glances and lingering touches soon escalated into clandestine meetings and passionate encounters. Their first rendezvous occurred under the guise of wedding planning. Mia had asked Blake to help her choose a surprise gift for Evan, knowing full well that her intentions were far from innocent. They met at an upscale hotel bar, the kind of place where discretion was guaranteed, and questions were never asked. As they sat close together, Eds bent over a catalog of watches. The electricity between them was palpable. Blake's hand brushed against Mia's, and in that moment, all pretense fell away. Without a word, they made their way to a room Blake had reserved, just in case. The guilt came later. As Mia lay in bed next to an unsuspecting Evan, she told herself it was a one-time mistake, a moment of weakness that would never be repeated. But the thrill of the forbidden proved too intoxicating to resist. Blake and Mia developed an elaborate system of coded messages and alibis. Text about flower arrangements meant a meeting at their hotel. Call about suit fittings signaled a rendezvous at Blake's apartment. They became experts at stealing moments together. A quick tryst in Mia's office, a passionate encounter in Blake's car parked in a secluded spot. The risk of discovery only added to the excitement. There were close calls that left them breathless with fear and exhilaration. Once, Evan nearly walked in on them at a family dinner where Blake and Mia had snuck away to the coat closet, a heated embrace. Another time, a friend of Mia's spotted them holding hands in a cafe across town, forcing them to concoct an elaborate lie about discussing surprise party plans for Evan. As the wedding day drew nearer, the intensity of their affair increased. Mia found herself comparing Evan to Blake, always finding her fiancé wanting. Blake was spontaneous where Evan was predictable, dangerous where Evan was safe. She began to question everything about her relationship and the life she had planned. Blake, for his part, found himself falling deeper than he ever intended. What had started as a conquest, another notch in his belt, had become something more. He began to imagine a future with Mia, one where they could be together openly. The fact that this future would come at the expense of his cousin's happiness, the detail he conveniently ignored. In quieter moments, both Mia and Blake were plagued by guilt. They knew the pain their actions would cause if discovered, the lives they would destroy. But in the heat of passion, these concerns always faded away, overshadowed by the intensity of their desire. As the weeks passed, their ability to separate fantasy from reality began to blur. They made promises to each other that they knew they couldn't keep, spoke of a love that was doomed from the start. All the while, the date of Mia and Evan's wedding loomed ever closer. Ticking time bomb neither of them knew how to defuse. Evan Brooks had always prided himself on his intuition, his ability to read people and situations. It was a skill that had served him well in his conservation work, allowing him to navigate complex negotiations and delicate ecosystem. But when it came to the betrayal brewing right under his nose, Evan found himself uncharacteristically blind. First hints of trouble were subtle, easily dismissed. Mia's sudden obsession with her phone, the way she would quickly end calls when Evan entered the room, increased irritability she blamed on wedding stress. A lingering scent of unfamiliar cologne that she attributed to a new coworker at the gallery. It was Blake's behavior that finally triggered Evan's suspicion. His cousin, usually so eager to be involved in their lives, began to make excuses to avoid family gatherings. When he did attend, there was a nervous energy about him, a guilty look that flashed across his face whenever he glanced at Mia. Evan tried to shake off his doubts, telling himself he was being paranoid, but the nagging feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. He began to pay closer attention, noting the way Mia and Blake seemed to communicate without words, the inside jokes that excluded him. Unable to confront his fears directly, Evan embarked on an amateur investigation. He found himself doing things he never thought he would, checking Mia's phone when she was in the shower, scanning credit card statements for unexplained charges, even driving by Blake's apartment at odd hours to see if Mia's car was parked outside. Each new piece of evidence felt like a knife twisting in Evan's gut. A receipt for 2 glasses of champagne at a hotel bar on a night Mia claimed to be working late. Text message from Blake that simply read, "Missing you," quickly deleted from Mia's phone. A lipstick smudge on Blake's collar at a family dinner that matched the shade Mia wore. As the wedding day drew closer, Evan found himself trapped in a spiral of suspicion and denial. He wanted desperately to believe in Mia's love, to trust in the future they had planned together. The evidence was becoming harder to ignore, and the weight of his doubts was crushing him. Evan's internal struggle began to manifest in his behavior. He became distant and distracted, often losing the thread of conversations. His work, once his passion, now felt meaningless in the face of his personal turmoil. Friends and family noticed the change, attributing it to pre-wedding jitters, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. 2 weeks before their wedding, Evan's suspicions reached a boiling point. He decided to confront Mia, hoping for an innocent explanation for the troubling behavior he had observed. In their shared apartment, Evan initiated a serious conversation with Mia, who was in the midst of finalizing wedding preparation. He directly questioned her about her relationship with his cousin Blake, his voice barely concealing his emotional turmoil. Mia responded with practiced composure, feigning innocence and dismissing Evan's concerns. However, Evan noticed subtle signs of her discomfort as he presented his evidence: secretive phone calls, unexplained absences, and guilty looks. Despite Mia's denials, Evan persisted, detailing specific incidents that had aroused his suspicion. Mia's responses became more elaborate and defensive, insisting that Evan was overreacting due to wedding stress. She emphasized her love for him and questioned why she would jeopardize their relationship. As the confrontation intensified, Mia suggested calling Blake to corroborate her stories. Evan observed her nervousness as she dialed and put the call on speaker. Blake's voice filled the room, smoothly backing up Mia's claims and providing alibis for every suspicious incident. The united front presented by Mia and Blake left Evan feeling drained and defeated. Their seamless coordination in denying his accusations only deepened his fears and suspicions. By the end of the conversation, Mia attempted to reconcile, attributing Evan's concerns to wedding-related stress. She urged him to focus on their upcoming nuptials. Evan, unable to articulate his feelings, merely nodded in response. As he looked into Mia's eyes, Evan realized that everything had changed. The trust that once formed the foundation of their relationship had been irreparably damaged, and with it, the future he had envisioned began to crumble. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. Perfect day for a celebration of love. But within the luxurious bridal suite of Thornwood Manor, the atmosphere was anything but joyous. Mia sat at the ornate vanity surrounded by her bridesmaids as they fussed over her hair and makeup. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and drawn despite the artfully applied cosmetics. The weight of her deception pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe in her intricately beaded gown. Across the estate, in a smaller room designated for the groom's party, Evan stood motionless as his best man adjusted his bow tie. His face was a mask of calm, betraying none of the turmoil raging within. The decision he had made in the dark hours of the morning felt both terrifying and inevitable. Blake arrived late, slipping into the room with an apologetic smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Evan watched his cousin in the mirror, noting the nervous energy that radiated from him. Their eyes met for a brief moment and Blake quickly looked away, unable to hold Evan's steady gaze. As the hours ticked by and the ceremony drew nearer, the tension in both rooms continued to build. Mia found herself fighting back tears, ruining her carefully applied mascara. Evan's hands shook as he slipped his grandmother's watch onto his wrist. Family heirloom he had once imagined passing down to his and Mia's children. Blissfully unaware, guests began to arrive, filling the air with excited chatter and laughter. The string quartet started to play, their gentle melodies, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos unfolding behind closed doors. As the wedding planner's voice came through the door, announcing that it was time to take their places, three hearts raced with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The moment of truth had arrived. The grand ballroom of Thornwood Manor had been transformed into a floral wonderland. Garlands of white roses and delicate baby's breath adorned every surface, their sweet scent filling the air. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over the assembled guests. As the music swelled, all eyes turned to the back of the room. Evan stood at the altar, his face an unreadable mask as he watched the bridal party make their way down the aisle. Blake, standing beside him as best man, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Evan and the entrance. Then, the bridal march began, and Mia appeared in the doorway. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. She was a vision in white, her gown a masterpiece of lace and silk that seemed to float around her as she moved. But those closest to her could see the strain in her smile, the slight tremor in her hands as she clutched her bouquet. As Mia glided down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes locked with Evan's. In that moment, a silent communication passed between them. Evan saw the fear and guilt in Mia's gaze, while she recognized a coldness in his eyes that made her blood run cold. The ceremony began, the officiant's words washing over the couple without really registering. Mia's responses were automatic, her voice barely above a whisper. Evan's were clear and strong, but lacking the warmth and love one would expect on such an occasion. As they reached the exchange of vows, palpable tension filled the room. Guests shifted in their seats, picking up on the undercurrent of unease emanating from the couple. Blake stood rigid, his face a shade paler than usual, as if sensing the impending disaster. "Evan," the officiant said, "you may now recite your vows to Mia." Evan took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the crowd before settling back on Mia. When he spoke, his voice was clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the hushed room. "Mia," he began, "I stand here today not to recite vows of love and fidelity, but to speak a truth that can no longer be ignored." His words sent a ripple of confusion through the guests. Mia's eyes widened in horror as she realized what was about to happen. "For weeks, I've suspected that the woman I thought I knew, the woman I was prepared to spend my life with, has been living a lie," Evan continued, his voice growing stronger, fueled by the pain and anger he had been holding back. "And not just any lie, but one that cuts to the very heart of trust and family." Gasps and murmurs filled the room as Evan continued, his gaze now shifting to Blake, who had gone deathly pale. "Mia, you've been having an affair with my cousin, a man I asked to stand beside me as my best man." The silence that followed was deafening. Mia stood frozen, her bouquet slipping from her fingers to land with a soft thud on the floor. Blake took a step back, as if trying to distance himself from Evan's accusation. "I have proof," Evan said, his voice breaking slightly. "Emails, text messages, hotel receipts. While we planned our future, you two were sneaking around, betraying not just me, but everyone here who came to celebrate our love." The room erupted into chaos. Mia's mother let out a wail of distress, while her father stood up, his face purple with rage. Evan's parents sat in shocked silence, their eyes darting between their son and their nephew. In the aftermath of Evan's revelation, Mia found her voice amidst the chaos. She pleaded with Evan, attempting to explain the situation and insisting that his understanding was incorrect. But Evan had reached his breaking point and was no longer receptive to her words. Turning to address the bewildered guests, Evan apologized for the false pretenses under which they had gathered. He announced the cancellation of the wedding, his words echoing through the stunned silence of the venue. With this declaration, he stepped down from the altar and began his solitary walk back down the aisle. As Evan passed Blake, paused briefly. In a voice laden with hurt and betrayal, he expressed his deep disappointment, emphasizing the brotherly bond he had once believed they shared. The assembled guests watched in shocked silence as Evan made his way toward the exit. Before he could reach the doors, commotion near the altar redirected everyone's attention. All eyes turned back to where Mia and Blake stood, as a new drama began to unfold at the focal point of what was supposed to be a joyous celebration. In the midst of the shocked murmurs and confused exclamations, Blake's hand moved to the inside of his jacket. Time seemed to slow as he pulled out a small, gleaming object, concealed handgun. As the situation escalated, Mia was the first to notice the dangerous turn of events. She cried out Blake's name in alarm, her mascara-streaked face contorted with fear. Her scream cut through the chaos, drawing everyone's attention. The assembled guests turned to see Blake raising the gun, his hand visibly shaking. Evan, alerted by Mia's cry, turned back to face this new threat, his expression one of utter disbelief at the sight of his armed cousin. Panic immediately erupted in the venue. Guests scrambled for safety, some hiding behind chairs, while others rushed for the exits. The string quartet abandoned their instruments, which clattered to the ground as the musicians fled. Despite the chaos, Evan maintained a surprising calm. Addressing Blake in a steady voice, he attempted to reason with his cousin, urging him to reconsider his actions and lower the weapon. However, Blake appeared beyond rational thought, eyes wild and unfocused as he ranted about ruined plans and lost happiness. Mia, her wedding gown now disheveled, cautiously approached Blake. She pleaded with him, her voice shaking, trying to convince him that violence wasn't the solution. For a brief moment, it seemed her words might reach him, but Blake's resolve quickly hardened once more. The tension reached its breaking point, as Blake declared there was no turning back. In a blur of motion, he tightened his grip on the trigger. Mia lunged forward in an attempt to disarm him, while Evan sprinted toward them in a desperate bid to protect Mia. The scene culminated in a heart-stopping moment, as the deafening sound of a gunshot reverberated through the ballroom, leaving everyone in shock and uncertainty about who, if anyone, had been hit. The echo of the gunshot lingered in the air, followed by a brief, chilling silence. Then, as if released from a spell, the scene erupted into chaos once more. Mia collapsed to the ground, pristine white wedding gown, quickly staining with an alarming spread of crimson. Evan rushed to her side, all previous anger forgotten in the face of this horrific turn of events. Cradled her in his arms, the gravity of the situation overwhelming him. Meanwhile, Blake stood frozen in shock, the weapon slipping from his grasp and clattering to the floor. His expression was one of stunned disbelief, as if he were unable to process the consequences of his actions. Evan desperately tried to stem the flow of blood from Mia's chest wound, his voice breaking as he pleaded with her to stay conscious. His earlier feelings of betrayal were now replaced by a frantic desire to save her life. Mia struggled to focus on Evan, her eyes fluttering open with great effort. In a barely audible whisper, she attempted to apologize, her words interrupted by a cough that brought a trickle of blood to her lips. The gravity of her condition became painfully clear as she fought to express her regret, leaving the air heavy with unspoken words and the uncertainty of her fate. Around them, the scene was one of pandemonium. Guests with medical training rushed forward to help, while others frantically called emergency services. Blake Hudson, now devoid of any fight or emotion, remained rooted to the spot, unresisting as Evan's father and another guest restrained him. Blake's eyes were glazed, his once charismatic charm replaced by a blank, distant stare. He seemed detached from the chaos around him, as though he couldn't comprehend the enormity of what he had done. The wait for the ambulance felt interminable. Evan held Mia, whispering words of encouragement and forgiveness, trying to keep her conscious. But with each passing minute, responses grew weaker, breathing more labored. By the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. Despite their best efforts, Mia Larkin was pronounced dead at the scene. Her life cut tragically short on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The news spread like wildfire among the guests. The atmosphere at Thornwood Manor shifted from shock to grief. Mia's mother, Susan, collapsed into sobs, inconsolable at the loss of her daughter. Her father, David Larkin, stood rigid with disbelief, the image of a man shattered beyond repair. Evan's parents were left speechless, unable to process the magnitude of the tragedy that had unfolded before their eyes. The ballroom, once filled with joy and anticipation, became the site of a nightmare that would haunt all who were present for years to come. As the police arrived to take control of the situation, they quickly apprehended Blake, now too broken to resist. He was charged with second-degree murder and was led away in handcuffs, a shadow of the man he once was. In the months that followed the tragic events at Thornwood Manor, the lives of everyone involved were irrevocably changed. Blake Hudson, once the golden child of his family, now faced the rest of his life behind bars. He was sentenced to life in prison, his bright future extinguished by a moment of jealousy and rage. In the media frenzy that followed, his name became synonymous with betrayal and tragedy. The story of Mia's murder dominated headlines for weeks, with every sordid detail picked apart by the public. Evan Brooks, meanwhile, was left to grapple with overwhelming grief and guilt. In the days following Mia's death, couldn't escape the haunting question of whether things might have turned out differently had he acted sooner, had he confronted the affair earlier, or had he not chosen to expose Mia and Blake on their wedding day. He left his job at the non-profit organization, unable to focus on his conservation work in the wake of such personal devastation. Seeking solace, Evan retreated to the remote wilderness areas he had once fought to protect. He spent months in isolation, hiking through national parks, staying in rustic cabins far from the reach of society, and trying to heal from the loss that had shattered his world. But even in nature, where he had always felt most at peace, the weight of his past followed him. The memories of Mia's final moments haunted his every step, and the guilt of her death continued to eat away at him. Back in Charlottesville, the Larkin family struggled to pick up the pieces of their once glamorous life. David and Susan Larkin withdrew from public life, devastated by the loss of their daughter and the scandal that had engulfed their family. Their estate, once the setting for high society gatherings and charity galas, became a hollow shell of its former self, a stark reminder of all they had lost. Thornwood Manor, the site of the wedding-turned-tragedy, became infamous in the months following Mia's death. People whispered about it in town, counting the horrific events that had unfolded within its walls. It was said that the place had a haunting presence, a lingering sadness that seemed to hang in the air. Eventually, the Larkins sold the estate and moved away, unable to bear living in the town where their daughter had met her tragic end. As the years passed, those who had witnessed the events at Thornwood Manor carried the weight of that day with them, each in their own way. For Evan, pain would never fully fade. He had loved Mia, and though her betrayal had nearly destroyed him, Her death left a void that nothing could fill. He would often return to the wilderness, searching for peace, but the scars of that day would remain with him forever, a reminder of love, loss, and the fragility of life. Blake, now serving a life sentence, spent his days in prison reflecting on the choices that had led him to that fateful moment. His once charmed life was now confined to the cold walls of his cell, where he replayed the events over and over, trying to make sense of the madness that had consumed him. The guilt weighed heavily on him. There was no going back, no undoing what had been done. And so, the story of Mia Larkin, Evan Brooks, and Blake Hudson became a cautionary tale, a reminder that beneath the surface of even the most perfect lives, darkness can lurk, and in a moment of weakness, lives can be forever altered.